The missing 411 encounter. Jake and his best friend Mark were avid hikers. They had spent years exploring national parks together, always looking for new and remote trails. So, when they set out for a weekend camping trip in a less visited section of a national park, they were excited. The trail was rugged and isolated, far from the crowds of more popular areas. It was just the kind of adventure they craved. The first day of the trip was uneventful. They set up camp by a small stream, enjoyed the scenery, and spent the evening telling stories by the fire. But as the night wore on, something unsettling began to happen. Jake and Mark started hearing strange whispers coming from the trees. It wasn't the wind, it sounded like voices, faint, distant, but definitely human. At first, they laughed it off as the wind playing tricks on them, but the whispers kept getting louder. And then, just as they were about to dismiss it, a figure appeared in the trees. It was a shadowy figure, moving between the trunks, but it never came close enough for them to make out any details. Mark was the braver of the two and decided to check it out. "I'll be right back," he said, grabbing his flashlight. Jake stayed by the campfire, trying to stay calm, but his mind was racing. It had only been a few minutes when he realized Mark hadn't returned. An hour passed, and Jake was starting to get worried. He called Mark's name, but there was no answer. The whispers grew louder, almost mocking him now. He grabbed his backpack and started looking for Mark in the woods, calling out every few steps. When the search party arrived, Mark was found, but something was horribly wrong. Mark was barefoot and disoriented. His clothes were on backward, and he had no memory of how he had gotten so far from the campsite. Even stranger, his GPS watch showed that he had walked in a perfectly straight line for miles, through dense trees and difficult terrain, without stopping or deviating from the path. The trackers couldn't explain it. Mark hadn't taken a single wrong step, and yet he didn't remember the journey at all. The rangers dismissed it as some kind of survival instinct or confusion. But Jake knew something was wrong. Mark had been drawn somewhere. Something had guided him. As the days went on, Mark began to have vivid, disturbing dreams about shadowy figures leading him through the forest. They were always just out of reach, but they never let him go. The twist. The park rangers later informed Jake that Mark was not the first person to experience such a strange disappearance in that area. They referred to it as Missing 411, a phenomenon where people disappear in national parks and return with no memory of what happened. Some of them, like Mark, never fully recover. Engagement, hook. Do you think Mark experienced something supernatural, or was it just an extreme case of survival instinct? Could there be more to these missing 411 disappearances than we know? Mia had worked the night shift at the downtown hospital for over a year. The building was old, with creaky floors and a constant hum from the electrical wiring. It wasn't unusual for things to feel off, but Mia was used to it. One night, after finishing her shift, she was exhausted and just wanted to get home. She stepped into the elevator to head to the ground floor. The elevator groaned as it started its descent. Mia pressed the button for the ground floor, but instead of going up as expected, it started to go down. It didn't stop at any of the normal floors, though. No lights flashed, and no one was waiting at the usual floors. The elevator descended deeper and deeper into the bowels of the building, and Mia began to feel a sense of dread. The elevator came to a halt in a basement she didn't recognize. The doors opened with a slow, grinding sound, revealing a long, dark hallway. There were hospital beds lined along the walls, their sheets covered in dust. The air was thick, musty, and the silence was deafening. Mia felt a wave of nausea and unease. The most unsettling part, however, was the shadowy figure standing at the end of the hallway. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, but it felt like it was watching her. Panicked, Mia pressed the elevator button frantically. The doors closed, and the elevator began to ascend, slowly at first, then faster, until it reached the normal floors once more. Mia was too shaken to process what had just happened, but when she told security, they looked at her with confusion. The twist. The basement Mia had entered was sealed off years ago. It hadn't been used for decades, and no one was supposed to have access to it. The hospital records showed that no one had ever worked in that section for over 30 years. Engagement hook. Was Mia hallucinating from exhaustion, or did she accidentally stumble into something far more sinister? What do you think happened in that basement?